Hey guys, it's Radio Free Innsmouth episode 200 or something. What the fuck?
앞머리 안 자를 거예요.
Oh, that's right. The special 200th anniversary episode. And I don't have shit planned.
아니 촬영 같은 거 하다 보면은
No, put that hammer down. I'm only messing with you. I didn't have anything planned right when I finished episode 199 last week, but I thought about it and I realized that a good way to celebrate 200 episodes would be re-examine a band that I did on the first episode of RFI. That's right, episode 6 about Malokarpatan. Because episodes 1 through 5 don't fucking count, they're bad.
You're a poopy head.
Hell, even episode 6, like, the musical analysis in, like, the first third or so is good, but after that it kind of sucks, and I don't know who this other Jub guy was, but he talks all fucking slow. He sounds depressed. Probably on, like, fucking cough syrup or something.
Uh-oh.
But for all its faults, I do consider that to be the first episode of what RFI would become. It is the beginning of the transition from dime store Brett Stevens' mouthpiece to, the wild and hopefully wonderful goofiness you're all familiar with today. But I wanted to talk about Malokarpatan because that episode came out a long time ago. Since then, I've learned a lot more about this band. I've learned about where they came from. I learned about the other bands they played in, and they've even put a new album out in the intervening years. Years plural, yikes.
Who puts these stairs here?
This is actually going to end up being a two-parter. The first part for Malokarpatan themselves, and the second part for the other two bands these guys are running. Why does Malokarpatan get their own part? Well, it's because I think they may in fact be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, currently active black metal band. Even way back in 2017, I said that the second Malokarpatan album was probably album of the year, and I stand by that. But what the hell is a Malokarpatan?
A miserable little pile of
Slovakian black metal. I guess in its barest essence, yes, but also not entirely. First, we need to define the term Malokarpatan. So Malo in Slovak means little or a little. Karpatan means the Carpathians, the little Carpathians. Everybody likes the Carpathians, right? That's where we get all this good shit happening.
Die, monster. You don't belong in this world.
But are they really little? They seem like some big-ass mountains to me. I think the way that they're using the term little here is meant to imply both familiarity and also is sort of like a diminutive thing, maybe to make it a little bit more rustic, a little bit more familiar. And that makes sense because the general idea behind this band seems to be rustic pastoralism. It's still about spooky black metal shit, but it's about spooky black metal shit in the Slavonic woodlands with a particular folkloric kind of peasantry bent to it. It's also about bringing together some interesting influences because in addition to be highly inspired by Slovak folk music and Slovakian folklore, they also claim to be heavily inspired by Merciful Fate, King Diamond, and Motorhead, which is pretty wacky for a black metal band. I mean, not that wacky. Lots of black metal bands are inspired by Merciful Fate, but the specific way that they are inspired by Merciful Fate is very interesting. And I also detect major notes of Master's Hammer in their approach to music. So the way they pull from Merciful Fate isn't necessarily to have a whole bunch of Satan and a whole bunch of No, instead they pull specifically from the idiosyncratic Merciful Fate songwriting style, with its heavy emphasis on compositional revelation, as I would term it. Allow me to demonstrate. Here's a classic Merciful Fate track from the 80s. It's entitled Gypsy. This is essentially the verse riff, what the guitars are doing right here, and it's going to lead into what is kind of the chorus riff right around now. Simple little two-chord thing. But then here comes the revelation, completely changing the song up. It's sort of a massive expansion on the pop music structure idea of a bridge. You know, you do a verse, chorus, then you do like sort of a little extra thing that's different before going back to the chorus again. They took that and then they moved it much more towards classical music and made it just this like epic turnaround within the song. Aside from, you know, the wacky vocals and the lyrical topics and the face paint and the capes and whatnot, this is what makes Merciful special. This is what makes Merciful Fate historically relevant, and this is what also makes Malokarpatan great. It is the main feature of their music, if you ask me. Now, I mentioned another band in there, Master's Hammer. They're from one country over. They are in Czechia, and Malokarpatan is in Slovakia. Remember when there used to be one thing, Czechoslovakia? Anybody remember that?
Their bones become more brittle. They are less flexible. They're less resilient.
I mean, to be fair, I was ridiculously young when that split up happened. But anyways, Master's Hammer. widely considered to be the beginning point of second wave black metal. Them and Tormentor from Hungary, probably. Sort of the bridge between the Celtic Frosty stuff and your Norwegian stuff. One of the first black metal bands to use these like very orchestral keyboard sounds. In fact, their second album they refer to as a black metal operetta, as you can tell by the pompous Wagnerosity of it. But here comes a motif. You remember this. This is one of the first black metal bands that was really big into using leitmotifs. They were also one of the first black metal bands to be very weird, as you can tell by this weird, off-time, odd riff with little bits of chuggy nonsense in it. The riffs are very modular. They have a lot of little components that intersect and can be taken apart and put together in new ways. Then there's a healthy amount of thrash metal. All of this will be important for Malokarpatan. Also, the guy coughs into the mic. I always thought that was odd. So you can hear the melody from that intro leitmotif sort of peeking its way through this riff right here, but it's going to become much more obvious right around now. See, it's back. Same melody, it's back, but it's different, okay? That's motifs in a nutshell. And that was one of the big things that Master's Hammer was known for. So you take this idea of like weird leitmotifs and odd reconstituted riffs that can be like taken apart and put together in different ways and have a lot of sections to them. You take that, you mix it with the whole Merciful Fate idea of the epic turnaround, and you add a whole lot of weird Slovakian folklore, folk music, folk whatever the fuck to it. You get Malokarpatan. And it was a bit of a rough start for them, as evidenced by their first album, The Witching Days' first track, the wonderfully titled, What the Deuce Did That Old Hideous Hag Pour Into My Cup? I'm gonna come out and say it sounds like this album was recorded it in a rehearsal room, and it probably fucking was. Maybe that makes it more rustic and pagan or fucking whatever, but it sounds like ass. The riffs themselves are good though. Here comes the first turnaround. This right here is a bit of a bridging riff. It has elements of the cadence of that first section, and it's bringing in more of the groove and weird note choices that will be a major part of this massive revelation. There's that big Merciful Fate turnaround. Lead guitar in this band is very odd and bluesy at times. It gets more technically adept later, but even here in its more elemental form, I find it to be rather pleasing. It has a nice groove to it. You know, I think that's a word they would use to describe it themselves. Hard stop transition into ye old-fashioned fast black metal, but with still a bit of like a weird bluesy Motorhead-ish bounce to it. That's the Motorhead coming in. So that first album, if that had been the only thing that they'd put out, it would have been an interesting curiosity. You'll notice that that first transition where they had the little bridging riff that was halfway groovy and halfway stormy black metal into the groovy part, that was pretty well done. The second one was like very sudden and kind of jarring, whereas if you go back to Merciful Fate, the transitions are only jarring in the sense that they are surprising to hear that level of songwriting complexity in what is ostensibly a spooky cape-wearing, top-hat Satan metal band, but they're actually very smooth. Not always the case in Malokarpatan's first album. You know, solid B-level album, good stuff. Some people, it's their favorite one. I'm not gonna knock you if that's how you think. Maybe you're way more into the raw sound of it than I am. But as with their second album, my favorite album from 2017, that they got really, really good, because they fixed all of the problems I had with everything. The transitions are much smoother. The bits of folk influence are incorporated, less in terms of just like, oh, here's a sample as some guys going like, that's the intro to the song, then we go like, way less of that this time around. Instead, the bits of folk music, the folkloric influences, are woven into the structure of the songs themselves, which, coupled with the Merciful Fate technique of intense revelatory turnarounds, leaves us with great songs like Within the Dense Woods, The Witch is Hiding in Her Hut on Magpie Legs. You might have noticed that their song titles are all really fucking long because there's sort of like sections of conceptual stories. That's something I got from Master's Hammer too. Personally, I find it to be kind of charming. Anyways, this riff right here is probably the most normal black metal one on the album, but here comes that turnaround stuff. So they've combined the Merciful Fate idea of the epic song turnaround with the Master's Hammer idea of like really weird riffs that bend a whole lot and have like different modular sections coming together. Pretty interesting stuff. Also, the vocals, despite this being like a more rock-based part, the vocals do not function like rock vocals. They're more just there for texture. They don't really follow the rhythm and cadence of the riff in like a sing-song kind of pattern, which is very unique. And speaking of unique, we are going to be getting into that much more thorough incorporation of folky sections I mentioned earlier, beginning with this bit that sounds like the fucking Phantasm theme, but with some spooky throat singing stuff under it, leading into some wordless clean vocals. See what I mean? This is way better than just like intros and outros as samples. And there is some straight up black metal that fits in seamlessly with the rest of everything else. I love this like Dark Throne style big fucking floor tom hit. Dun dun. I heard that on like Under a Funeral Moon a lot. So overall, you could tell the production on this album is leagues ahead of their first release. It doesn't sound like a rehearsal room anymore. It sounds like very fucking professional. But more than that, the songwriting on this is amazing, and that's why I would consider them to be one of my favorite black metal bands. Amazing, epic songwriters. You want to hear some more groovy rock kind of shit? All right, well, here we go with Not Long After Midnight. The Abomination has crawled out of that hole. On the original Malokarpatan episode from fucking 4 years ago, I guess, I spent a whole lot of time talking about the song In the Provincial Pond, a water goblin has been raging for centuries. That song was originally my favorite back when I first had the album, but now I think I like this one more, due to its potent combination of like that very groovy heavy metal intro riff leading into this like rising heavy metal thing. Remember when I mentioned the solos on the first album? Well, check this out, they got a lot better. Very emotional lead guitar that heavily weaves itself into the riff structure of the song. Massive improvement over what were already really good solos in that first album. Okay, this section's interesting because not only is there a lot of folk music shit going on in this album, there's also a lot of psychedelia happening, as evidenced by these like analog synthesizers being played over this kind of weird droning rock and roll riff. Very interesting stuff. Nice bass right there, by the way. Bass playing is very much at a premium on this album. And you could tell that this is building towards probably something pretty heavy. And there it is. This total like rock and roll thrash riff. I love the way that he introduces it here too. This is nuts. Achtung! That was really cool. I liked the build up with the drums there. Those little like rolling fills that were building anticipation for a good old fashioned black and roll hoedown. And now we get to one of the other major reasons I had for re-examining Malokarpatan is in the intervening years since that original not so good episode came out. They put out another album. And this album, their newest one, it's from 2020, The Fires of Krupina. It's a much denser album and less accessible than the prior album, Nordkarpatenland. It took me a little bit longer to really get into, but now that I've like fully absorbed it over like the past year, it might just be the best material from them so far. So one of the things I like to talk about from a musical structural standpoint is motifs, and this album is huge on them. He's big on doing almost like sort of a Wagnerian overture type thing, where at the beginning of the song they might play like the main theme once, and then it doesn't show up for a very long time, but there's like little echoes of it here and there until like the actual true form of the main theme re-emerges in the middle of one of those big Merciful Fate style change-ups. Perhaps the best example of that on this very lengthy album is on the 10-minute long second track, From the Seed of the Hunger the Magic Root Arises. Here's that main leitmotif. Keep it in your head because it is going to color most of this song quite noticeably. But yeah, we start out with some black metal type stuff. Not that out of the ordinary. Definitely a little bit Masters Hammers sounding, which is normal for them. Vocals on this album are also probably the best they've ever been. They're a little bit more sync to the music as opposed to on like the previous two albums. They're really wacky and like out of sync with everything in a very atmospheric fashion. Here's a cool little, maybe Rotting Christ style, palm muted consonant riff with a bit of a black thrash aggressive tail to it. See, this is almost that riff from the beginning of the song, but it's ever so slightly different. This is motivic variation, and it abounds on this album. And it allows them to lock into some very solid grooves. The softer sections of this album are even better than they were on the prior album. Really good usage of folk instrumentation, acoustic guitar, Jews harp, triangles, glockenspiels, all kinds of stuff. And the analog synthesizers are still there, don't you worry. But these sections stand out to me even more on this album because they're less weird little stylistic digressions and more like very important and very well thought out and structured components of each song that they appear in. Leading into... There's that motif from the beginning. It's back now and it's very triumphant sounding. And it's going to have a really cool like counterpoint riff stacked up against it right about now. This almost sounds like something you would hear on a Psy album, so you know I love it. And that, in essence, is the standard Malokarpatan formula. Fairly simple to describe, very complex in execution, and it makes for some great listening. I'm not kidding, I really think these guys are one of the best black metal bands active today. But they didn't spring up from nowhere with that first album. These guys actually have two other bands that they are involved in, one of which predates Malokarpatan, and is those two bands that we will cover next week. So I'll see you then. Thanks for listening.
You're a poopy head.